Amma walked through the bustling village market, her presence unmistakable. The sound of chatter slowed as people turned to watch her stride. She wore fine clothing that shimmered in the sunlight, the fabrics flowing with grace and elegance. Her every step demanded respect, and the villagers, who once saw her as nothing more than a humble servant, couldn't help but take notice. A vendor at a stall called out to her with a smile, "Good afternoon, madam." Others exchanged quick glances, whispering among themselves about how Amma had risen from nothing to become someone important. Her gaze swept across the market, and she acknowledged the greetings with polite nods, her expression serene, though her mind raced. Her calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the vibrancy and chaos around her. She had come a long way, and it was clear to all that she now walked the path of power. But then, the laughter reached her ears. A familiar voice pierced through the noise, mocking her. The voice was loud, filled with cruelty, and it immediately triggered painful memories. Amma's pace slowed as she turned her head toward the sound. "Look at her. Always thought she'd be nothing," the voice sneered. It was Kofi, the man who had tormented her for years. He stood with his back turned, unaware of Amma's presence, yet his cruel words hit her like a slap. For a moment her heart raced and her chest tightened. She could hear the sound of her past echoing in those words. The long hours spent cleaning floors for Kofi and his family, the insults, the mockery. The past she had worked so hard to escape came rushing back in a flood. Amma's face remained calm, her posture unshaken, but inside she felt the storm of her past surge. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. Then with resolve, she walked forward and turned to face the source of the voice. Kofi was standing outside a small shop, laughing, oblivious to her presence. His eyes widened in shock as they met hers. His smile faded, replaced by a stunned silence. He blinked, trying to comprehend the reality before him. "What's wrong, Kofi?" Amma's voice was smooth, but there was an edge to it now. "Do I look different now?" Kofi's arrogance quickly turned to surprise. His lips parted as he stammered, "Amma, is that really you?" A small smile tugged at Amma's lips as she met his gaze. "Yes, it's me. The one you thought would never amount to anything." The words hung in the air between them. Kofi's confidence, the very thing that had once driven him to mock and belittle her, faltered. His eyes scanned her up and down, disbelief clouding his face. He had never imagined that the girl who had been forced to serve him would rise above him. Amma's voice was calm, but the power in it was undeniable. "Funny, isn't it? All this time, you thought I'd remain the same. But look at me now." Kofi's eyes moved from her to the shop behind her. His gaze lingered there, confusion turning into realization. The shop, this place that once belonged to people like him, now belonged to her. He took a step back, his face slowly draining of color. The disbelief on his face was clear. How had she done it? How had she gone from being the one who cleaned his floors to owning the very place he stood in front of? Amma took a step closer, her voice unwavering. "I own this shop now, Kofi, every inch of it, and I didn't need anyone to hand it to me." Kofi's pride slipped away, leaving only shock and disbelief. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come out. Finally, he managed a weak response. You're serious, aren't you?" Amma stood tall, her posture straight, her confidence radiating. She didn't need to say more. Her success spoke for itself. Kofi, who had once looked down on her, now found himself humbled, and as his pride crumbled, Amma was the one in control. Amma had come a long way from her humble beginnings. Once a girl who scrubbed floors and worked tirelessly under the harsh commands of others, she now stood in her shop, watching customers move through the aisles. She smiled quietly to herself. I never knew my hard work would lead me here, she thought, reflecting on her journey. The market was full of life, and so was her heart. Her hands, once calloused from endless chores, now crafted a thriving business. It was a symbol of her strength, and the pain of the past only made her appreciate her success even more. She had learned much, not just through hard work, but through the wisdom given to her by the elder who had guided her every step of the way. Kofi, the man who once mocked her for daring to dream of a better life, now found himself in a very different place. The wealth and power his family once held had crumbled, and he stood now, struggling to keep his small, worn-out shop open. Hidaimi Tilu stood at the door, looking around at the failing business he had inherited, his pride shattered. I never thought it would end like this, he muttered under his breath. His former arrogance, once so loud and confident, had been reduced to a whisper. The life he once knew, where everything was handed to him, was gone, and now he had to face the consequences of his own actions. Amma, however, had risen. Her mentor, a wise elder who had seen potential in her when no one else did, had guided her with lessons that would shape her destiny. Remember, child, your strength is not in seeking revenge, but in creating a future better than your past, he had told her. Amma had listened, taking every word to heart. The road had been difficult, but her success was built on more than just ambition. It was the wisdom of the elder, the hard lessons of humility, and the courage to rise from her past that gave her the strength to stand as a powerful woman today. Amma's family, once so powerful, had fallen into ruin. Her aunt and uncle, who had once controlled so much, now found themselves scraping by, trying to maintain appearances in the face of their defeat. Their business had collapsed, and their pride, once their greatest strength, had now become their greatest weakness. We never thought it would come to this, Amma's aunt said, her voice trembling. We were once proud and powerful, but now, look at us. The words echoed in the room, heavy with the weight of their humiliation. They had seen themselves as untouchable, but now they were no more than shadows of what they had been. They came to Amma, desperate, yet unwilling to shed the airs of their former grandeur. Their clothes were unkempt, their eyes tired, but their pride remained. They had fallen, but they still carried the belief that they were entitled to something. Amma stood before them, silent, weighing their words. Her family needed her help, but the question lingered. Did they deserve it? The memories of how they had mistreated her, used her as nothing more than a servant, flashed before her eyes. You want my help, but do you deserve it? Amma asked. You treated me like a servant. Now you stand before me, broken. What should I do? The tension thickened as Amma's words hung in the air. Her family, once so powerful, had now become beggars in front of her. They had no choice but to ask for help, but they could not bring themselves to fully humble themselves. We are family, her uncle said. His voice strained as he tried to hold on to what little dignity he had left. You can't just forget everything we've been through together. Amma's calm demeanor never wavered. She had spent too many years under their thumb, suffering their neglect and abuse. Now they stood before her, desperate and begging, but she could not forget this past so easily. Their power over her had ended the moment she chose to rise above them. She stared at them, silent for a moment, then spoke, her voice firm. You want me to help, but you never truly respected me, she said, her tone sharp and unyielding. You taught me how to survive, but now you want me to fix what you destroyed. The words hit like a storm. Her family was left speechless, unable to respond. The power dynamics had shifted, and now it was Amma who held the control. They stood there, powerless, unable to reverse the damage they had caused. The realization washed over them slowly, painfully. They had failed to recognize the strength in Amma, and now they had to face the reality that she was no longer the young girl they could dismiss. Amma stood tall, unwavering. Her rise was not just a result of hard work, it was the result of years of perseverance and the strength to never give up. Now her family had to learn the same lessons, and in that moment, the true battle had been won. Amma stood before Kofi, the memories of her time as a servant flashing in her mind. The days when she had scrubbed floors and worked tirelessly, her hands raw, while Kofi and his family lived in comfort. It felt as if the years had melted away, and she could almost hear the echo of his harsh words and mocking laughter. Her chest tightened as she remembered the sting of those days, the feeling of being invisible, the weight of unspoken insults. Her gaze hardened as she looked at Kofi, the same man who had once seen her as nothing more than a servant. "You never saw me as more than a servant, did you?" Her voice was steady, but it carried the pain of years past. Kofi, unaware of the transformation she had gone through, chuckled, still in disbelief. His laughter echoed around them. "You still cleaning floors? Or did you finally find a rich man to marry?" His voice rang with mockery as he looked her up and down, thinking she was still the same. Amma's expression remained calm, her shoulders squared with confidence. The contrast between her stillness and his boisterous demeanor was striking. She was no longer the girl who had served him. She had become someone strong, someone who knew her worth. His words no longer had the power to affect her. She simply stood tall, knowing his mockery was only a shield for the fear building inside him. He didn't know who he was mocking now. Then the moment came when Kofi realized the truth. The laughter that had filled the air died instantly. His eyes widened as he stared at her, struggling to understand. "Wait, you're Amma. But you—" His voice faltered, his disbelief clear. Amma smiled, but it wasn't a smile of joy. It was a smile of quiet power. "Yes, it's me. And you are no longer the man I once feared," she said, her tone calm but cutting. Kofi stumbled backward, his face pale, as the weight of his words and actions fell upon him. She let the silence linger before she spoke again, her voice low but clear. "Funny, isn't it? All this time, you thought I'd remain the same. But look at me now." Kofi's eyes flicked toward the shop behind her. It was hers. His mouth hung open as he realized that this place, once a symbol of his family's wealth, now belonged to the woman he had once belittled. His pride, the pride that had once defined him, began to slip away, and his disbelief turned to shock. "I own this shop now, Kofi. Every inch of it," Amma continued, standing tall. "And I didn't need anyone to hand it to me." Her words were simple, but the truth in them struck him like a blow to the chest. Kofi's arrogance shattered, and he was left speechless. His facade crumbled as he realized that the power had shifted. She had turned every painful moment into the strength that built this place. Amma's gaze remained steady as she saw Kofi's realization sink in. His earlier mockery now seemed hollow. "I didn't need anyone's help to rise," she said. "I used what I learned from people like you to build this." The past that he had used to keep her down had now become the fuel for her success. Each step of her journey had been carefully calculated, a plan set in motion by the mistreatment she had endured. Kofi, who had once controlled her, now stood powerless before her. His pride, once unshakable, had been reduced to nothing. The man who had thought himself untouchable now understood that he had been the one who underestimated her. Amma knew the time had come to confront her family. The roles had changed, and now it was her turn to hold the power. She had helped them once, but this time She would not be swayed by their pleas. They had treated her as less than nothing, and now they would see what it meant to be truly humbled. The decision was hers, and she would not make it lightly. "You want my help," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "But you must respect my terms. This is no longer about family, it's about survival." Her words were firm, as her family stood before her broken, humbled, and desperate. They still held on to their old pride, but Amma could see it slipping away with every word she spoke. They had no choice but to accept the truth. Her family tried to assert themselves, their voices shaky but defiant. "We are family," her uncle said, struggling to hold on to the power that once belonged to them. "You can't just forget everything we've been through together." Amma's calm demeanor remained unshaken. "You want me to help, but you never truly respected me," she said, her tone sharp. "You taught me how to survive, but now you want me to fix what you destroyed." The words struck hard, and her family was left speechless. They had no retort, no defense. The power had shifted, and now it was Amma who held the strength. They had come to her, expecting help, but they hadn't come to her with humility. They still held on to the remnants of their past arrogance, but it was no longer enough. The roles had shifted, and now they had to face the consequences of their actions. The weight of their pride was too much to carry. Amma knew that her help would come, but it would come on her terms. Amma stood tall behind her desk, her eyes sweeping over the room, the same desk where she had once scrubbed floors in secret, humiliated by the very people who now stood before her. Her hands, once calloused and tired, now rested calmly on the surface, commanding the room's attention. "This office used to be your playground. Now it's mine," she spoke, the calm edge in her voice unmistakable. Her family, once proud and full of their own importance, now entered with hesitant steps, unsure of how to act in this new world where Amma held the power. Kofi and the others looked around, feeling the weight of their past actions pressing down on them. The walls seemed to close in with the tension of a reality they had never expected to face. Kofi stood there, his shoulders stiff, as if trying to hold on to a pride that was slipping away. He had once thought himself untouchable, the one who would always have the last laugh, especially at Amma's expense. But today, that arrogance faltered. Amma spoke with quiet strength. "You thought I would always be beneath you? That I would stay your servant forever? No, Kofi! I am my own power now!" Her words cut through the room like a sharp blade, leaving Kofi stunned. He tried to steady himself, to find the words to respond, but all he could do was stumble. The mockery he once poured on her now seemed like a distant memory, a foolish mistake. The realization hit him with full force. He had underestimated Amma. The very person he thought he could control had now surpassed him in ways he never imagined. Amma's voice grew firmer as she revealed the extent of her power, making it clear that she held the future of her family in her hands. "I could destroy everything you built, but that's not the path I choose. You have a chance to rebuild, but it will be on my terms." The words echoed in the room as Amma stood with unwavering resolve. She wasn't seeking revenge. She wasn't looking to tear them down just for the sake of it. What she wanted was simple: justice. She would not let the pain of her past control her decisions, but neither would she let them off easy. The choice was theirs: work hard, rebuild from the ground up, or continue to wallow in their pride and face the consequences of their actions. Kofi's face drained of color as he heard Amma's words. The arrogance that had once defined him, the belief that he could always get by with a smile and a sneer, was gone. Now, all that was left was desperation. "Please, Amma, give me a chance. I didn't realize. Please, I was wrong," he begged. His voice wavered, stripped of the pride he once wore like armor. The reality of his fall from grace was too much to bear, and in that moment he understood just how far he had fallen. The man who had once made others kneel to his will was now kneeling to her, hoping for just a sliver of mercy. Amma didn't flinch. Her decision had been made long ago. "I'll give you a job," she said, her words firm, as unyielding as the ground beneath them. "But you'll start at the lowest rank. No more privileges, no more special treatment. You'll earn everything you have now." The weight of her words was like a heavy stone placed upon Kofi's chest. His pride had been shattered, and there was no way around it. This was no longer a favor. It was a test. The very thing he had once mocked was now the thing that would shape his future. He nodded slowly, swallowing the bitter pill of humility as the realization settled in. He had no choice but to accept it. The tables had turned, and he had no choice but to face the consequences of his past. Amma watched her family leave the office, their shoulders slumped, their pride still hanging like a heavy cloud over them. They had accepted her offer, but it was clear they did not fully accept their new reality. The weight of their former arrogance made each step they took feel like a struggle. As they walked out, Amma's uncle muttered under his breath, "We didn't expect this, but we will work. We have no choice." His face was flushed with shame, and his voice wavered with the bitter taste of defeat. The tension between them all was palpable, and though they were now under Amma's command, the old power dynamics remained unresolved. They walked out, proud yet broken, their heads held high, but with the unmistakable burden of their own pride preventing them from fully embracing the change. Kofi, once a man of influence, now found himself in the dust of humility. He scrubbed the floor, the same task he had once seen as beneath him. The brush in his hand trembled slightly as he worked, each stroke of the bristles a painful reminder of the life he had lost. "I can't believe this," he muttered, his voice heavy with frustration. "I was on top of the world, and now this." The once confident Kofi, who had lived a life of luxury, now found himself forced into the same labor he had once mocked. His hands shook, his pride still fighting against the physical work he now had to do. The reality of his fall was too much to bear. The man who had once held all the cards was now on his knees, the taste of bitter defeat in his mouth, each movement serving as a reminder of his own downfall. Amma sat in her office, the window offering a view of the bustling marketplace below. She had come so far, and yet the journey was still fresh in her mind. She had not wanted to see her family suffer, but she knew this was the price of their past actions. "I didn't want to see them suffer, just to see them learn," she thought to herself, her eyes fixed on the life below. "This is the justice I've been waiting for." The pain of her past had been turned into the strength that propelled her forward. She had used everything they had done to her to build something better. There was no revenge in her heart, only the satisfaction of knowing that she had stood strong. Resilience, not bitterness, had brought her peace. She had learned from her struggles and had emerged victorious, no longer a victim, but a force in her own right. Kofi, meanwhile, continued, with his labor, his mind slowly shifting as he worked. The physical exhaustion that weighed down his body began to reshape his perspective. "This is harder than I ever thought it would be," he said quietly to a fellow worker. "But maybe this is what I needed to see." The once arrogant man, who had spent his life in comfort, now understood the true value of hard work. The days of luxury were far behind him, and the reality of survival was teaching him lessons he had never considered. As his sweat dripped and his muscles ached, his arrogance slowly faded. With each task he completed, Kofi began to see the worth in the people he had once looked down upon. He recognized his own flaws, and for the first time, the world seemed larger than his pride. As the day drew to a close, Amma felt a quiet satisfaction settle in her chest. She knew that her family, despite their struggles, had learned valuable lessons. The path to redemption was still long, but it had begun. "This is only the beginning," she whispered to herself, watching her family members labor. "No one gets to escape their past, but they can choose their future." The weight of their past actions had not disappeared, but with each step, they were moving toward something better. Amma stood, her shoulders back, the world now in her hands. Her journey was not over, but it had reached a crucial point. Her past had shaped her, but her future was hers to control. As she left her office, she knew that her family, too, would have to walk the same path of humility and hard work that she once did. The transformation was underway, and no one could stop it. She stood quietly, her eyes fixed on the bustling business below. She had come so far from where she had started. The memories of scrubbing floors, of being the servant, still lingered in her mind, but they no longer held power over her. This success, the empire she had built, was hers. She had earned every bit of it. "This is what hard work looks like," she whispered, the words carrying the weight of everything she had overcome. Her hands, once tired and calloused, now moved with purpose, building the future she had always dreamed of. The market below, full of life and energy, was a reminder of how far she had come. Her family's downfall had been painful, but it had paved the way for her rise. With each passing day, as she surveyed her empire, she felt a quiet satisfaction. She was the one in control now. The humiliation they had faced had been their lesson, and now she stood as the master of her own fate. No one could take that from her. Amma's thoughts drifted to her family. They had once considered themselves untouchable, believing their wealth and status would never falter. But now they were left to rebuild from the ground up. "I hope they see the value of hard work now," Amma thought, her heart heavy. There was no joy in their suffering, but she knew it was necessary. They had to learn humility if they were ever to rise again. Forgiveness was a part of her journey, but it did not mean forgetting. She had been through too much to simply let it all go. Forgiveness is not about forgetting. It's about choosing to move forward, she reflected, her gaze steady. She had chosen to offer her family a path to redemption, but that path would not be easy. They would have to work for it. Her decision had been a hard one, but it had shown the strength of her character. The real question was whether they would truly learn from their mistakes. As she looked ahead, Amma thought about the power of choice. She had made many difficult decisions in her life, and each one had shaped her future. "I may not control everything, but I control how I respond," she told herself. The road ahead would be filled with challenges, but she had already overcome so much. Her decisions had brought her here, and she was ready to make more bold ones. She was the master of her destiny. Hard work and humility had been the keys to her success. The lessons learned through pain had made her who she was. "Hard work is the key. No one can take that away from me," she reflected, a quiet confidence in her heart. She remembered her humble beginnings, the days when she had nothing but the will to survive. Now, with everything she had built, she knew that no matter what happened next, her future would be shaped by her own hands. This was just the beginning. Amma smiled as she thought about the future, knowing that she had the power to make it whatever she chose. The journey had been long, but it had led her to this point. The challenges ahead were only stepping stones, and she was ready to face them, head on. She had already shown herself what she was capable of. Now she would show the world.